Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be doing another forecast discussion, and today it's going to revolve around the event for tomorrow. The SPC has an enhanced risk, a level 3 out of 5 for severe weather across portions of the Deep South and Southeast on December 27th, 2024. This is the day 2 outlook, so this is for tomorrow. And the hazards are going to include all hazards. So we're going to be seeing strong tornadoes across a wide swath of this region, eastern to northern Louisiana into much of central Mississippi and extending into western Alabama. A large 5% surrounding that in the brown shaded region there. So a little less probabilities with greater extent from that 10%, but still isolated tornadoes are definitely possible to the north up into the Tennessee Valley as well, with that 2% stretching through Tennessee. Another threat is going to be damaging winds across a large swath of this region as well. They haven't quite upgraded to a significant wind threat, but that is likely to get ironed out over the next 24 hours as we get more consistent model consensus over the next 24 hours. But overall, still a pretty significant, widespread, damaging wind risk across the deep south. And then a 15% hail risk, not particularly robust, and we'll get into the details on why that is the case, but isolated hail across parts of the deep south into eastern Texas, much of Louisiana, southern Arkansas, into much of Mississippi and western Alabama. Let's start looking at some of the current conditions. We have a pretty large plume of showers across the deep south, stretching into the Ohio and Tennessee valleys here. Going to continue to shift off to the east into the mid-Atlantic across the next few hours. We have a deep cyclone across, not really deep, but a cyclone nonetheless across the Midwest and two portions of western and northern Illinois. This is going to continue to shift off to the northeast, and we're going to get renewed cyclone development across the southern high plains across the next few hours and into tomorrow morning. But overall, free of precipitation to the west here, and is likely to stay a factor until that next wave from the upper levels starts ejecting into the southern high plains, and we get that renewed cyclogenesis and that mass response to unfold. It is nighttime right now, so we're not really going to get a good picture of the visible satellite imagery, but we can look at the geocolor imagery here. It is a bit buggy considering that the western half of the US isn't quite into the nighttime hours. So, but again, across the deep south into Texas, we are seeing pretty meager cloud cover down to the coast. Let's zoom in a little bit here, get a better idea. But we have this plume of cirrus starting to impinge the southern high plains. That is the sign of our next trough starting to make its way over the southern high plains and the Mexican plateau to the south. So we're likely going to see lee cyclogenesis as a response pretty soon over the next few hours and into tomorrow morning, but overall seeing very free of cloud cover just around that target area for tomorrow. Going off to the east where most of those showers are going on, again, pretty free of cloud cover, so it's likely going to be the cirrus plume that advects to the east and starts to entrench most of this region. So we're going to see how cloud cover is affecting tomorrow's regime and allowing for that surface heating and instability to build throughout the afternoon. But overall, we're looking to see a pretty juicy setup in terms of surface heating and a lot of instability to build throughout the morning and afternoon hours going into tomorrow. Across much of Louisiana into Mississippi and Alabama as this band of cloud cover and showers moves off to the northeast. With that, let's look at some observed surface data here and just kind of look at some of the moisture here. And we've had quite a bit of convection that's been going on here, so a lot of convective overturning and a little bit of shunting of that moisture to the south that was here yesterday. We had a pretty juicy air mass that was sitting in place here, and it's still sticking around with us, but mainly down here across the coast of Texas, seeing that higher quality moisture. So it's kind of been shunted to the south, but that's likely going to be advected north with that strengthening southerly surface winds as lee cyclogenesis does manifest across West Texas and Northwest Texas here across the next couple hours and into tomorrow morning. You can kind of already see a broad cyclonic circulation here, and that's going to be our next low-level cyclone that does manifest across tomorrow and then shifts off to the east very rapidly, and we'll get that target area to start getting more of that plentiful moisture. But overall, seeing a pretty juicy air mass, upper 50s to low 60s dew points across much of Texas, and then upper 60s dew points to the south. Let's look over to the east where most of those showers are going on. We see a bit higher quality moisture, still a bit shunted off to the south, but we see a plume of upper 60s to low 70s dew points across southern Louisiana into southern Mississippi. So we already kind of have that moisture in place. No real showers going on in this region right now either. So we're not really expecting to see any convective overturning or that shunting of the moisture to the south. It's just going to continue to get richer with time as that cyclone develops to the west and we get that mass response across the southern plains. But overall, seeing a pretty juicy air mass already in place, not really going to have to worry about the moisture quality here. You're really just going to have to look at the timing of all the other parameters that we're going to be interested in. So that's going to do it for the surface map here. Let's just jump into some observed upper air data. And we have this lead shortwave trough that's rapidly translating to the northeast here. You can see those curvature in the ISO heights across the Midwest and Southeast. Seeing that band of showers just to the southeastern periphery of that jet streak that's rounding the base of the trough. And so this severe threat today is pretty marginal, and it's really not going to last too much longer as this trough continues off to the northeast. Our next kicker wave that's going to be ejecting across the region is this little perturbation in the flow back in here across the Four Corners region, seeing a stronger belt of enhanced flow rounding the base of this slight perturbation, and that's going to continue to amplify with time and surge down to the southeast. And it's starting to kind of impinge the southern high plains right now, so we're still starting to see a nebulous surface pattern, but still seeing some cyclonic curvature in the low levels, a semblance of some lee cyclogenesis going on. And that's going to continue to amplify and surge to the east and allow that cyclone to deepen even more throughout the next couple hours. But overall, we're seeing that kicker wave very diffuse right now, so it's not very strong. It's a very low amplitude feature. We're expecting to see that amplify with time as this belt of enhanced flow surges to the south. So we're going to see more significant mass response and a pretty large forcing regime for storms to work with across the open warm sector in the deep south tomorrow. And again, down at the surface, like, seeing that broad low-level cyclone across the southern high plains into the central high plains vicinity, and that low-level cyclone up to the north and western Illinois and eastern Iowa. It's going to continue to go off to the northeast, and that'll make way for this new cyclone to start making its way through the southern plains and into the deep south. And we'll be able to get that more unstable ingredients for severe storms to make their way into those regions. So with that, I think it's time that we jump into some model data. We'll start with the NAM here, and we'll start with from the upper levels again. And of course, at 500 millibars, again, we see that lead shortwave across the Midwest and Central Plains going to continue to eject off to the northeast. Storms off to here in this region are likely going to dissipate with time. And then we'll see this jet streak off to the northwest here start to dig to the southeast and amplify that trough with time. And we'll see a more substantial low-level cyclone across the south here into the West Texas vicinity. Moving with time here, we see that jet streak off to the northwest starts to dig southward, and we see that by 9Z on Saturday, we have a pretty well-defined shortwave trough across Texas and the deep southwest here. A jet streak still rounding the western periphery of that trough, so it's going to continue to amplify and dig to the southeast. And so going forward in time, once again into the early morning and afternoon, we see it digs even more to the south. It's really sharp curvature in this trough as well. So this is going to be a very strong trough. That jet streak now at the base of this trough and going to rotate through the flow and exit through that eastern periphery of the trough and allow that forcing to manifest across a large swath of the region. But overall, already seeing a pretty juicy setup here for widespread forcing for ascent. Seeing west-southwesterly flow across northern Texas and western or in eastern Oklahoma, and more westerly flow down to the south here. So seeing a bit of defluence in this region, so a precursor to some convective initiation in the early afternoon hours come tomorrow. but then we get that wave to fully eject into the target area, seeing that jet streak rounding the base and sitting squarely over that Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama region, and even extending a little bit more to the north there. But widespread forcing for ascent and substantial height falls with time, allowing for a lot of storms to go up. But we see that most of that 500 millibar flow is quite southwesterly to westerly, and so with respect to that low-level baroclinic zone, we could see discrete convection manifest across a large swath of this region, hence the 10% hatched tornado threat tomorrow. So a strong flow in the westerly direction at 500 millibars is a really good sign of a widespread supercell environment. Overall scene, pretty good look here. The trough becomes even more amplified in the overnight hours tomorrow, seeing it more negatively tilted by 9Z, and that's going to cause even more forcing for ascent. And so a widespread QLCS moving to the northeast with time is a likely occurrence. And then moving into Sunday, we'll see that threat manifest across the mid-Atlantic from Georgia northward into Virginia, seeing a slight risk for Sunday. Not really going to go into depth into that event. Not quite as robust as the tomorrow's event quite yet, but it's definitely seeing a good look here at 500 millibars, a pretty large, expansive jet stream ejecting through that region, and a lot of height falls to manifest a lot of storm initiation across a large swath of that region. Moving down to 700 millibars now, let's look at some of our smaller scale shortwave troughs embedded within the flow. And come 12 to 15Z on Saturday, we see a little lead shortwave right in here across eastern Oklahoma into northwest Texas here. Sorry, northeast Texas. And that's likely going to be the precursor to convective initiation in the early morning hours. And likely going to see mainly just hail and damaging winds initially back in here. That's likely going to be the first hazard that's going to be associated with these initial storms. And then they'll grow upscale into more Boeing segments and a larger range of supercells across a larger region. And we'll see that low-level jets start to increase with time, and so tornado threat more likely to the east as we get more widespread convective initiation. And this deeper shortwave to the west starts to eject through the region. And so going throughout time in the early afternoon and evening hours, we see that more substantial shortwave now co-located in the deep south and seeing very widespread jet streak here at 700 millibars. So a sign of increasing low-level shear and a very focused region for strong storms in general for on all hazards threat. Moving throughout the overnight hours, it rapidly translates and again amplifies with time as that upper level jet becomes more negatively tilted. And so we see at 700 millibars a very strong jet does manifest. And so with northeastern extent could see a lot more greater low level shear. But the warm sector with in terms of moisture quality is not going to be as robust with northern extent. So into Tennessee might not be as robust of a uh, tornado threat, even though we have very strong flow in that region. It's all about those low-level thermodynamics as well, not just the kinematics. But at 850 millibars to see how our moisture regime is going to set up in that low-level shear as well. Again, we see that low-level cyclone develop here across the northern or the southern high plains at 12Z tomorrow at 850 millibars. And then with time, we would expect that flows would start to increase just ahead of that, and we do. We see a pretty strong low-level jet of 40 to 50 knots across Louisiana eastward into much of the deep south. And so low level shear is going to be increasing with time as we get into the early afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. This is 21Z, and that low level jet starts to manifest and strengthen as we get into 0Z, seeing a wide swath of 50 knots across Mississippi. And so co-locating that low level thermodynamic moisture. And so definitely going to be a robust threat for tornadoes across that region with that strong low-level jet, enhancing that low-level shear. And then with time, we see that low-level jet will increase as the nocturnal nature of that jet, and then seeing upwards of 70 knots at 850 millibars. So very, very strong up to the north, but we're going to see if that co-locates some of that low-level moisture regime and see if we would even get robust storms in that region anyway. So it's not just about the kinematics, but still a good look in terms of low-level shear and strong moisture advection. So definitely going to see a large swath of storms across much of the region tomorrow. Going down to the surface and looking at some of our dew points, again, we have that more higher quality moisture down to the south, across the deep south, and right along the coast of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. And that's going to continue to advect to the north as we get that lee cyclone to develop across the southern high plains. This is at 12Z, and we see that cyclone across West Texas is pretty much in the same region as that 850 millibar cyclone come this time. And then we see that it ejects off to the east, and we get very high quality moisture to get upwards of southern Arkansas up into the Red River, and then up into almost that southern Tennessee region come 18Z. And then it continues to surge northward in that eastern sector as that low-level cyclone shifts off to the northeast. And by 3Z, we see again a large swath of 60s dew points still across Mississippi, Louisiana, and even Alabama eastward. And so we're going to have to see how this moisture regime is going to evolve with time. How north is it going to get? Because that's going to basically tell us the northern extent of the severe risk, at least the most robust severe risk. Because overall, we still see a large swath of upper 50s to low 50s dew points northward of this 60s plume down to the south. So still gonna have to see if we can get any more robust storms to the north, or if that higher quality moisture really stays shunted to the south, and really we don't see that robust severe threat with northern extent. Maybe it's only down in this region and here. But overall, the deep south looking like a favored corridor for robust severe weather across a large swath of the region. So keeping an eye on that region for sure. Let's go back to about 18Z across West Texas and or Eastern Texas and take a sounding here. And come 18Z, we see a pretty unstable atmosphere, about 1600 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE come 18Z, and a very deep moist boundary layer extending from the surface up to about 600 millibars, and upper 60s dew points at the surface. Very strong low level instability as well, in excess of 100 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE. But again, that low level shear is not really robust, very straight hodograph with that west southwesterly flow at the surface, and not very strong low level jet by this time either. So the tornado threat's not going to be very robust across East Texas here, and going throughout time, that low-level shear doesn't get any better. This looks more of like a convective initiation signal here on the model, deep moist layer and an omega signal here on the left. So might be a sign of convective initiation. And then going throughout time, we would expect this profile to become a little less robust. This is just a sign of the NAM basically evening out the profile after convection. After this, we would expect basically a diminish of that profile, and we do. So basically no instability left and low quality moisture. So going across portions of southern Louisiana here, uh, very, very unstable atmosphere by this point at 18Z, seeing upwards of 2,600 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE at 18Z, and more southerly flow at the surface. So seeing a little more curvature of that hodograph, but keep in mind that that low-level jet is going to continue to increase and veer out of the west, so you would see a more substantial hodograph curvature come the next couple hours. So if we do move on with time into the 21Z time frame, we do see that we do get a little greater quality low-level shear by this time period, seeing about 215 meters squared per second squared, excuse me, of effective storm low felicity come 21Z, and that's co-located with about 120 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE. So very unstable low-level thermodynamic environment co-located with extreme low-level shear is going to promote some semblance of a strong tornado threat, especially considering this low-level thermodynamic environment. Once again, a very deep, moist boundary layer, 70s dew point to the surface, extremely low LCL heights, and so again, very favorable environment for robust severe weather. Let's move over to the east now, to southwestern into central Mississippi. 18Z seen a little less in the way of instability, but still doable for strong storms. 1,500 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE. And again, that low level instability also pretty robust, about 100 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE, co-located with a deep moist boundary layer and 60s dew points at the surface, upper 60s dew points rather, and then south-southeast surface winds. And so we've seen even more robust low-level shear here. Very curved hodograph, 40 knots at 850 millibars, so strong 850 millibar low-level jet. promoting about 270 meters squared per second squared of effective storm level felicity. And so looking even more favorable to the east here in Mississippi, and very low LCLs as well. And keep in mind, this is 18Z, so let's keep going and see how this evolves with time. And by this point, we have now 300 meters squared per second squared of effective storm level felicity, so increasing that low level shear with time, and that low level instability still staying pretty high, as well as that deep layer instability still staying around 1500 joules per kilogram. And so again, that environment's going to be staying pretty strong for a long period of time. And so we could see a pretty large swath of strong tornadoes across this region. Going to 0Z, that low level shear keeps increasing almost 400 meters squared per second squared of effective storm level felicity. Low level instability decreasing with time, but still sufficient for strong low level stretching of that surface vorticity, about 70 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer Cape, and still sticking pretty good at the mid in the deep layer in terms of instability, about 1500 joules per kilogram of mixed layer Cape. So very favorable. And continuing on with time, seeing much of the same. That low-level hodograph continues to elongate, and that low-level instability and deep layer instability continuing to stick with us with time. And then we finally get that convective signal by 6Z here on the NAM. So by this point, we're going to see quite a bit of convective overturning and not much of a tornado threat by that point, going into the 6Z time frame and past that. So probably going to end around 9Z, that threat overall in terms of southwest Mississippi. Moving over to the east in western Alabama, lower quality instability by 18Z and lower quality surface moisture. With time, though, it's likely going to increase as that warm sector expands to the east. And we do see a low level shear in excess of about 270 meters squared per second squared of effective storm level felicity. And low level instability, not quite as robust, though, and as well in the deep layer. But convective initiation is likely going to be a lot later in western Alabama. So by 0Z, seeing a little more instability, the low level shear still pretty robust. And then by 3Z, we are pretty much uncapped and ready to go here. About 1,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer Cape, about 45 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer Cape, and almost 400 meters squared per second squared of effective storm felicity. So pretty juicy and favorable tornadic environment overall. And that just continues to increase as we get into the 6 and 9Z time frame. More instability increases, more low level shear increases, and then we get that convective signal on the NAM. So pretty expansive threat, probably starting around that 18Z time frame, expanding eastward with time and ending in the late overnight hours, and probably stretching off into the mid-Atlantic and into the morning hours of Sunday. So overall, seeing a very, very favorable threat. Let's continue through the overnight hours and look more up into Tennessee, where that stronger low-level shear was likely to set up. Up in here, we are seeing very strong low-level shear, but also strong capping inversion at low levels. So likely not going to see a very robust severe threat up to the north, because capping inversion and also those lapse rates aloft are very, very poor, leading to very little to no instability to the north. And so likely going to see that severe weather threat be more confined to the south into that Alabama, Mississippi, southern Arkansas into central Louisiana for much of the day. In the morning hours, that hail threat in eastern Texas is more likely, and also into much of Louisiana and Arkansas, keeping that in the back of our minds. Very robust instability across that region. But looking at a sounding across southern Arkansas and the early portion of the event, come 18Z, only about 700 joules per kilogram of mixed layer Cape come this time period. Very limited low level shear. Not sure what happened here. Let's reload that. It increases with time though, as we get into the 21Z time frame. Also seeing a pretty strong signal of low level shear by this time. Seeing about 300 meters squared per second squared of effective storm level felicity at 21Z, about 100 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer Cape, so very efficient tilting and stretching of that surface vorticity, and then about 1,300 joules per kilogram of mixed layer Cape. So still a pretty favorable environment across southeastern Oklahoma, or not Oklahoma, southeastern Arkansas, excuse me. And so we're going to have to also keep in mind that area is very favorable for tornadoes. So I think that's going to do it for the overall severe weather parameters that we're going to look at. Let's look at now some of the convective allowing models and get a good picture of what it's going to look like tomorrow in terms of convection. Start with the HRRR, and again, it's kind of already representing some of that convection ongoing right now pretty well. Um, and that's going to continue to move off to the east with time and surge and weaken with time as well as that mid-level trough ejects off to the northeast, and then come tomorrow morning, we start to see convective initiation across East Texas here, a blossoming of a few discrete supercells, and that's likely going to be the precursor to some large hailstones that do develop across this region. I wouldn't be surprised if they upgraded the threat for hailstones across this region, mainly that western Louisiana and southwestern Arkansas, eastern Texas vicinity, mainly that seeing that corridor for the most enhanced hail threat. Um, but overall, seeing convective initiation pretty early here, about 12Z, and that's going to continue to increase with time moving into the early morning and afternoon hours, seeing a blossoming of cells, mainly going to be elevated, that eastern portion of those cells. But then back to the west, come 18Z, we see that first initial shortwave starts to blossom more cells across this front that's draped just below that surface low. That's going to be our initiating mechanism for storm initiation just here along the border of Louisiana and Texas. So seeing a blossoming of supercells across this region, and that's going to continue to grow upscale with time going into the 21Z time frame, shifting off to the east. And we get pretty robust QLCS that develops across Mississippi, and still very small zones of discrete supercells popping up, but still seeing that tornado threat extending throughout much of this region, and those isolated cells across much of the warm sector again after 0 and 3Z blossoming once again with western extent. So seeing a very large swath of possible tornadoes in this region right in here. And with northern extent seeing that instability waning with time, so not going to see very enhanced tornadic threat with northern extent, but still seeing Boeing segments start to make their way on this reflectivity member. And so damaging winds going to be a very, very likely threat as well throughout this region as well. Let's look at one more model here at the NAM nest. Going back in time, again, seeing convective initiation in the early morning hours across East Texas and Northwest Louisiana, moving into southeastern Arkansas, and then by the afternoon we get convective initiation like once again out to the west, a blossoming of discrete supercells and Boeing segments, and they'll translate to the northeast and increase in coverage and intensity. So again, seeing a blossoming of discrete supercells along with a lot of Boeing segments and a large QLCS that does develop as well. And so seeing much of the same threat across much of the same regions for tomorrow's threat. That's gonna do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Again, there is a level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk across the portions of the Deep South for tomorrow, December 27th, 2024. Hazards are going to include a 10 hatch tornado across much of Louisiana, Mississippi, and western Alabama, large 5% in that brown shaded region surrounding that. And then wind also going to be a primary threat, damaging winds across Louisiana, Mississippi, western Louisiana, much of the same regions. And it's going to be a 30%, not quite a significant wind threat quite yet, but I would not doubt that they increase that as the models start to become more consistent. And then the hail threat more shunted to the west across East Texas and Arkansas, much of Louisiana, and Mississippi. So not quite as robust and a little more shifted to the west, but still a threat that we need to look at. But I think it might be more robust with western extent across much of this region right in here. Well, that's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. And I'll see you guys in the next video, probably tomorrow morning for another update on this event. Peace.